Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the worst films of 2013. I do a worst list every year. I don't do a top 10 worst, and it's not because I'm being nice or anything. I usually don't think of more than 4 movies I think that are just like awful. And for me to put something as the worst, it has to be like really horribly, like I don't want you to ever see it ever bad. And it has to also be an awful movie too. There's a lot of movies who I think morally are bad or stupid or awful. Like these are the worst films I saw this year, guaranteed. Absolutely. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic or anything. The top 2 especially made my brain hurt because they suck so bad. And it's also that I get to choose what films I see. A critic who does like a worst list usually has to see everything or most of everything. So I know it's kind of been a trend with me that every year I pick 4, but these are the only 4 I could really think of. I'm going to count down from 4 to 1. The 4th one, which is a very bad movie. In fact, I saw it in a theater alone. It was a public screening. I think it was. I don't know. And no one showed up. And it was an awful piece of crap. But I kind of liked its B-movie-ness in a little bit of a way. Even though I think it's really, really bad, I still think it a tad bit enjoyable sometimes, but it kind of wore on me after a while anyway. Thus why it's on here. So number 4 is No One Lives. A couple who are moving from a vast distance and are going through a small town and stop at a little restaurant until a gang of criminals comes into the restaurant, spots them, and decides to kidnap them. They murder the woman, and then the man's there, and then when they're going through the car that they stole from them, they find a girl hidden in there, and she's like, "You freed me from this guy. He's like a psychopath. He's a crazed trained killer. I'm so glad you killed him." She finds out they didn't kill them, and then a bloodbath ensues where he slowly tries to kill all the criminals to basically get to her. This isn't ironic. This is just a B movie. It's reminiscent of a lot of B movies that I used to get for $1, and sometimes you get 2 B movies on one disc because like nobody cared about them, and why would anyone, because they're not very good. This film is like a lot of dollar bin movies or kind of drive-in movies. You know, if you ever saw the film The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, it's not like a good movie, but it's an awesome poster. And isn't that a cool title? But the movie is actually terrible. And No One Lives is a cool idea. It's a cool genre twist, but the problem with the movie is that the movie doesn't really even recognize that that's very clever. It doesn't like play up the twist very well. I have to give it points for being a B movie that's a bad B movie, because I guess I kind of somehow appreciate the artistry in its mediocrity. A lot of times when I really hate a movie, it's because it fails in its particular genre. And I don't know if this necessarily fails because this succeeds in being one of those dollar bin movies. And if that's what they were going for, they accurately made one, but it's not good or enjoyable, and it got very tiresome after a while, just like all those movies. Now, number 3 is a film that I actually really wanted to take a bathroom break during because it was so bad. And number 3 is Dead Man Down. Victor, played by Colin Farrell, who has started kind of a friendship type of slightly crush on his neighbor who lives across the way from him that he can see from his balcony, Patrice, played by Nomi Rapace. They strike up a friendship, and she shows him a video that he killed someone in his apartment, and she saw it, and if he doesn't help her kill the guy who messed up her face in a car accident, then he'll tell the police. And also what's going on as well is that Colin Farrell's gangster boss, played by Terrence Howard, is getting creepy messages in the mail from some unknown person and is being threatened and has had one of his gangster minion guys killed. And then we find out that Colin Farrell's behind the whole thing, that his uncle F. Murray Abraham is behind it as well. And at the same time, one of the gangsters, played by Dominic Cooper, is trying to slowly figure out what is exactly going on and who's behind these threatening messages. And all this is going on in Dead Man Down. Dead Man Man Down is extremely frustrating, incredibly messy, and just all over the fucking place. This film is way too moody and way too serious. I think if you took a pretentious teenager and made him write a film about mobsters in New York, this is what you would get. Just like an awful, forgettable B movie. I felt like I was watching something that I would watch 5 minutes of and turn off, and I was stuck there in the theater. Now, number two, some people have tried to defend for whatever reason. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic or even beat a dead horse, because it has been picked apart by a lot of people, and I thought it would probably not be great, but I at least went and saw it to give it a chance. But ultimately it was really awful, and it did leave and almost gave me a headache because it was so bad. So number two is The Lone Ranger. Tonto, who tells a little boy at a carnival in the 30s the story of the Lone Ranger, and thus begins the origin story of how the Lone Ranger became the Lone Ranger. And the Lone Ranger is trying to hunt down the guy who killed his brother and made him the Lone Ranger with Tonto's help. People have complained about minor squabbles with Django Unchained and True Grit, and then Lone Ranger comes along as probably one of the most hateable westerns I've seen in my entire lifetime. And I think the reason for that is that Gore Verbinski doesn't really care about making a western. He's just making a Pirates of the Caribbean movie that happens to take place in the West. It makes references to several movies: Little Big Man, The Red Balloon, The General, Once Upon a Time in the West, The Searchers, and it did them so badly when I was watching them, I was like, oh, well, that's probably a reference to this, but it's so badly done, it probably isn't, and it's just there because that's a coincidence, and like I couldn't accept it. I didn't really get the point of making a western like this. Like, why didn't he make a western like a western, but then still referenced westerns? It's like, did you want to prove to us that you've seen westerns, but then totally ignore the genre whatsoever? It's like 2.5 hour, excessive, ridiculous, badly structured Hollywood movie. And this just doesn't even attempt to really do or even have the subtlety that westerns used to have. It just wants to be a big, crappy, clunky western. You know, it's worse than Cowboys and Aliens. It's not funny in the least. I hate this movie. I just hated watching it. Afterwards, my brain was numb. I don't even want to talk about it. It's like, I feel like my eyes want to bleed because I hate this movie so much. Now, number one is so awful. It's so incredibly terrible that I honestly give it the distinction as the worst film I've seen since I've been doing reviews. Since 2009, this is probably the worst film I have seen. Mainstream, otherwise, it is so horribly awful. The number one worst film of 2013 is A Good Day to Die Hard. Any sequel to Die Hard is kind of going to be stupid, because the idea of a Die Hard sequel in itself is kind of silly. It's a film much like Jaws and Speed that really should have never had a sequel in the first place, but it has a franchise, and a very lucrative and big franchise, and it's kept going, and it's been able to make at least stupid action movies that were contradictory to the original idea of the first Die Hard, that you have this normal guy put in extraordinary settings that was the juxtaposition to what Stallone and Schwarzenegger were doing at the time, being this tough guy who comes in and wreaks vengeance and nobody can stop him. And then Bruce Willis just kind of became that anyway. A Good Day to Die Hard is absolutely the worst Die Hard film, and probably one of the worst mainstream action movies I've seen in the entire time I've been making videos. It's a really horrible movie. The thing that made this film so atrocious was the director John Moore, who was a fairly forgettable studio director before he made this film, and now I think will start to take the throne of Brett Ratner, because this is a real abomination of movie making, of action movie making, of big budget movie making, but really just filmmaking in general. This is such a terribly made and directed and shot film. There's a car chase at the beginning, which I think if you looked at storyboards of it, it would seem like it would be a really cool action sequence, but he shoots it with this shaky cam that is some of the worst shaky cam I've ever seen. It looked like I was watching a bad bootleg of a really cool sequence. There are certain directors who could make something out of a movie this bad, but John Moore, he made a pretty bad movie even worse. And you know, the thing about it is, like, I absolutely hate it, but it doesn't upset me because I was so numbed by it. I can't even get the passion in myself to like really hate it. It's just such a weird quality in a film because it was so messy, it was so horrible, the script was bad. I felt both disappointed, confused, and just bored. Part of me wants to talk about and try to understand why it was so awful, and another part of me never wants to think about it ever again. And that was my list of the worst films of 2013. I don't know, I hope nothing's as bad as last year, but I can already tell you The Legend of Hercules will probably be on my list next year. So, you know, we're already off to a good start, I guess. Every year is going to have its stinkers, and this year certainly had a big doozy of them with that Die Hard 5. There are certain films of last year that you certainly hated and didn't like. Why don't you tell me about them in the comments below, or how you felt about the 4 films that I picked as the worst films of 2013. And comment them on below, or even make a list if you would like to. And subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you very much for watching, and that's it.